What?
Someone who raised information to somebody?
Well, yeah, that's true, but what would be a kid's word for it if I'm going to be an informer against Regan? Snitch, right? Or tattletale, right? Or so. What the deal was is the government would offer someone 10% of the tax collected if they turned somebody in. Okay? They would offer 10%. So if Izzy owed $10,000 because she didn't pay $10,000 on her whiskey tax, and I turned her in, once they got her $20,000, because it's doubled, right? How much would I get for turning her in? 10% of 20,000 would be 2,000, right? So, here's what happened. Who were your snitches? Were they everyday common people? No, they were government officials that knew what was going on. So, let's put it in perspective here. Okay, here we go. Luke Mortimer is the Mortimer Whiskey Distillers. And Mortimer didn't pay his $50,000 in taxes. So, if he gets caught, what's he going to pay? 100. So I'm Mr. Informer, public official, and I turn him in. What am I going to get when he pays it? 10,000, right? So why would I not, as a public official with some clout, say, "Hey, Mortimer, didn't pay your taxes, huh? It's going to cost you 100 grand. I'll tell you what I'll do. You give me 25 grand, and I won't turn you in. Because if I turn him in, he loses 100. And I get 10. But if I don't turn him in, and he gives me 25,000, he's down 25,000 is all, and I gain 15. That's what these government officials were doing. They were going up to these whiskey distillers that hadn't paid their taxes and said, either pay me X amount of dollars or I'll turn you in, knowing that they would make more money from the blackmail than they would from turning them in. Well, guess who found out about this? Who found out about it? Benjamin Bristow. And he put an end to it big time. So the Secretary of the Treasury discovers this ring of whiskey distillers and blackmailers, and who's losing money in the end on this deal? The government, millions of dollars a year. So he puts the kibosh to it. Now there were lots of government officials involved, but the two most notable people that were doing this blackmailing were the head of the Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS. That was the one person that got caught, right? The guy that ran the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, he was doing it. And another notable person that was doing it was President Grant's private secretary. Who would have more knowledge on things like that than the President's secretary, right? So she or he, not sure, I think it was a he was doing the same thing. He was going up to the Mortimer whiskey distillers and saying, "Hey, I got a little information that says you didn't pay your taxes. Now you either give me 25,000 or I'm going to turn you in, it's going to cost you 100, and I'm going to make 15,000 more than I was going to." Does that make sense? That's what was going on. And it went all the way to the President's personal secretary. Yeah. The government. Federal government. If you were a snitch or an informer and you turned somebody in and they collected that money, you got 10% of it. And these people said, "Hey, I know I could make 20. And they blackmailed these whiskey distillers, and it worked really out well for both of them. So they didn't mind being blackmailed until what? They got caught. Then it became an issue. Okay? There's your next one. That was interesting. Okay? The next one was the Fort Sill scandal. Fort Sill scandal. This was interesting also. So about the time the whiskey ring ends, that scandal, we have another one known as the Fort Sill scandal. And this scandal involves the Secretary of War, William W. Belknap. So all of a sudden we got another cabinet member that's going to get himself in hot water. So right after the whiskey ring scandal, we now have the Fort Sill scandal. And it involved Secretary of War William W. Belknap. Now, Fort Sill was an Indian trading post in what is now Oklahoma. And what happened is that this fort was owned by a person, and the Indians would come and trade at that fort. And who got to make the decision who could set up trading posts in the West? The federal government. And in this case, Secretary of War Belknap's the one that gives the, quote, contract or gives the ability for a fort trading post to set up and trade with the Indians. Well, it just so happened the Oklahoma Territory, which was where most of the Indians were at the time, right across the Mississippi River, right? That's where they were. That would be the best place to have a fort with a trading center. And so what do you think Belknap did? What do you think he did? He gave his best friend the contract. He didn't let anybody else go in there. Fort Sill was it. Well, if we have one auto parts store in town, what's going to happen to the prices, kiddos? They're going to go up because there's no competition. So this friend of Belknap is just ripping off the Native Americans like you can't believe, charging way more than they should for this and that, whatever. What is Belknap getting in return? $6,000 a year from his best friend for continuing to sign him off as the only trading post there. Is that making sense to you? And Belknap's getting $6,000. And in the end, this goes on for almost 4 years, a little over 4 years actually. And Belknap, they found out, had actually accepted $24,500 from his friend for allowing him to be the exclusive trader in Oklahoma. That's about $500,000 today. So Belknap takes about $500,000 in today's dollars to keep signing his buddy up to be the trader there. Okay? Does that make sense? He ended up charging $6,000 a year. Every year he signed his buddy up to be the only guy there. He gave him $6,000, which is about $125,000 today. Well, over a course of 4 years, Belknap had taken like $24,500, which would be about $506,000 in today's dollars if you care. But he definitely was taking a bribe to give his buddy the exclusive rights to that trading post. Well, what happens when they found that out? The House of Representatives made arrangements to do what? Impeach him. And he resigned when he heard they were going to do so. But even though he resigned, the House still impeached him, and he went to a Senate trial, which was kind of interesting. And there were a lot of senators that weren't very happy that their time was being wasted because they couldn't figure out why they were putting him on trial when he resigned. So guess how they voted in his Senate trial? Because they didn't think they should have to be there. How'd they vote? Not guilty. So even though he was guilty of sin, officially he was not guilty. But he resigned, so nobody cared. So think about that. He resigns because he thinks he's going to be impeached. He resigns, they impeach him, they try him, but the senators are so put off that they're even having this trial because they can't see a reason for it. They vote not guilty. And so really, in history's record, did W.W. Belknap really do what he said according to law? No, but he did. There was no question about it. Now here's where it got kind of interesting. Because prior to this, part of the way they found out about it is they had a court hearing and had people come and testify on what they knew about what was going on in Fort Sill. Now, this is before the Plains Indian War that went into Montana, which included the Battle of the Little Bighorn. So guess who the star witness was for the prosecution against Belknap? George Custer. And Custer has now left the Civil War. He's a general, and he's going to be part of the Plains Indians Wars, fighting Indians, putting them on the reservation. And he's got some knowledge of what's going on at Fort Sill because he's been there. And so he's asked to go back and testify, right, against W.W. Belknap, which he does. And what he says about him is probably true. But then he gets kind of crazy. And on hearsay alone, guess who he implicates as also part of this scandal? What? No. President Grant's brother Orville. Who probably was involved. But Custer should have just stopped where he was and just said what he had to say about Belknap, right? Because he just goes out on his own, because he was a little bit arrogant, and on hearsay alone tells the court that Orville Grant, the president's brother, is also involved in this scandal. Well, what was coming up? The campaign of 1876 against the Indians, which included the fateful Battle of the Little Bighorn. And George Custer wanted nothing more than to lead the 7th Cavalry in battle against the Indians on the plains of Montana. Well, guess what guess what President Grant did when he found out that Custer testified and implicated his brother? Anybody know the story? What did he do? Wouldn't even talk to him, stripped him of his rank of general, and busted him down to lieutenant colonel. And made it really clear that he would not command the 7th Cavalry in the upcoming Indian Wars, the campaign of 1876. So Grant got mad at him and busted him from general to lieutenant colonel and told General Alfred Terry, I'm getting ahead of myself here, who he appointed to be the new commander of the 7th Cavalry in the Indian Wars, he told Terry, Custer will not lead the 7th Cavalry. You will. So General Alfred Terry actually is going to lead American soldiers against the Indians in the campaign of 1876, which results in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, which I think you've heard of, in which Custer was annihilated. Well, a little history in advance here. What happened is Terry knew Custer. Finally, Philip Sheridan and William T. Sherman, who were very close to Grant, talked Grant into letting Custer go. Not command, but go. Because Grant wasn't even going to let him go, he was so mad at him. So they talked him into letting him go. Well, once they got there, then Terry gave Custer command of the 7th Cavalry. Not as a general, but as a lieutenant colonel. Okay? And the rest is history, which we'll talk about later. Okay? But anyway, Custer's the one that implicated, and Orville Grant was more than likely in this thing. But Custer hurt himself. Okay, the very last scandal was the Tweed ring scandal. The Tweed ring scandal. And this was probably the worst scandal during the Grant administration. Probably the worst one of the ones we're talking about. And the person involved in this was a man named William Tweed. William Tweed was the man this centered around. Well, Tweed was an interesting guy. He grew up as an uneducated chair maker. And in 15 years of hard work, he rose to be a multi-millionaire and sometimes known as the dictator of New York City in the 1860s and 1870s. Okay? So William Tweed, who starts out as an uneducated chair maker, works really hard, and in just 15 years he becomes a multi-millionaire, also known as the, quote, dictator of New York City, where he ruled New York City in the 1860s and 1870s. Now, he had a pretty big group of followers. And Tweed was kind of an interesting guy. When immigrant families would land in America, he and or his followers would meet these immigrants as they came into America. And what would he do when he met them? Think about this. This is great. He would feed them. He would find them jobs. He would find them housing. He would bring them baskets of food at both Thanksgiving and Christmas. He treated them like gold. He and his followers would meet these immigrants as they landed in America. He would feed them. He would find them jobs. He would find them housing. He even left them baskets of food at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Why would he do that? Because these people are going to come into America and they're going to earn what? The right to vote. And he is setting them up because everything he's done for them, they're going to be loyal to him, and they're going to vote for candidates that he believes he wants in office. And it works like a charm for the most part. So these immigrants secure the right to vote once they get into the United States, become citizens, and they return Tweed's friendship by voting for political candidates he favors. Well, he also used his power, those jobs he gave those people. What did he demand in return for his services of getting them a job? Kickbacks. Okay? Kickbacks. Well, the scandal came when he wanted to finance and build a new courthouse in New York City. And the cost to build that courthouse was going to be $250,000, which should have been about $4.4 million today. Okay? So he has this mind that he is going to finance and build a new courthouse. And who's going to pay for that? He's going to do it, but who's really going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for this new courthouse in New York City? Taxpayers, right? And they thought the cost would be about $250,000 or $4.1 million. Well, 3 years later, it was still not completed. And what happens when you get behind? Price goes up. And finally it went from $250,000 or $4.4 million to $8 million or $142 million in today's dollars. And since he's the one building it and charging the government, where's that money going? In his pockets. So he's scamming the city of New York. He tells them he's going to build a courthouse for $250,000. 3 years later, it's still not done, and the price tag has risen to $8 million.
Wait, from 250,000
To $8 million. Not, yeah, from $4.4 million in today's money to $142 million. So he just raped the city of New York. And it was estimated that during this Tweed ring, the crooked Tweed stole nearly $20 million from the New York City government, and nothing could be done because everything was signed, sealed, and delivered. And that $20 million would have been about $435 million today. Okay? So it was estimated that during his dealings with this courthouse, Boss Tweed, as he was known, stole nearly $20 million from the New York City government. Scandal, scandal, but they never could hang it on him, right? So who took the heat on that? President Grant. Okay? So those are the scandals that happened. Just an unbelievable amount of scandals. Okay, here's where we're at. Monday we'll talk about the election of 1872 in which Grant is re-elected, and then we're going to give you a profile on Grant. We're done. So we will be done lecturing Monday. We will have a review on Tuesday, and then you people that are going to be gone can come in Wednesday morning and take your test and be done. Okay? Those of you that are not going on the trip, I'm going to give you an extra day and you will take your test Thursday. Okay, but if you're going to be gone Thursday, you need to take it Wednesday morning at 7:30. Okay? So everybody clear on that? We're good to go? Perfect. Yeah.
On Friday, boys soccer has to be gone.